Hello, my name is George Myhall, and I'm speaking to you from my Office of Image Archaeology, a place where I attempt to preserve the past for those good folks that follow us. In an attempt to keep this channel relevant, I sometimes post films to do with issues of the day. Produced in 1967, this film, The Island Called Ellis, touches on a subject that has been appearing frequently for some time in the news and discussions throughout America: immigration. Whether you're for it or not, whether it is legal or illegal, it affects the entire country. In this film, actor José Ferrer shares the history of immigration in America through Ellis Island in New York City. Millions of Americans today can trace their lineage across oceans from distant lands. Their first step on American soil was Ellis Island. They came here seeking a new and better life. The people immigrating through Ellis Island wanted to be Americans. They wanted to assimilate. They wanted to learn the language and the customs. They worked hard, and within a generation, they would be unrecognizable as immigrants. They were truly Americans, and they were very proud to be named as such. Millions of people have recently come to the United States across our southern and even northern borders during the 4-year period from mid-2020 to January 2025. These people did not apply or go through a vetting process like those come to America through Ellis Island. These newcomers have been a burden upon the tax-paying American citizen. They came here with expectations of getting free health care, free food, free housing, and a cell phone at the very least. How does it make you feel to know that these people can qualify for financial benefits that you, as an American citizen, are not qualified to receive? Is this right or wrong? Do you believe that these people came here to assimilate and become Americans? We all have an opinion. Share yours. Meanwhile, I just want to thank you for watching and have a great day, and please subscribe and tell others about the channel. Take care. A real quick note here, this film is 58 years old and it definitely shows its age. It's a little bit wore out. Much loved educational film and taught a lot of kids a lot of great things. Maybe it can teach us something too. Have patience in the first few minutes. Thank you.
The island is tucked away to one side of the upper bay, where the ships sail in and out in the shadow of the skyscrapers. It's only a has-been of the harbor now. The ships ignore it as they come and go. Even New Yorkers sometimes ask, "What's that? What's that place over there?" Once, millions who never saw it knew its name and what it was. There were different names for it. It was called the Gateway and the Golden Door. And it was also called the Island of Tears. In all the world, there has never been a place quite like it. There will never be again. It's empty and forsaken now. Nobody comes here anymore. Its day is done, its glory gone. But it was an epic island, an island of epics. 20 men and children passed through here on one of the great American adventures, perhaps the greatest. You are part of their story, and so am I, because their coming changed our America. Island called
Ellis.
What you notice first is the silence, the kind of haunted stillness which comes only to places that once were noisy with human life, to ghost towns, lost cities. One of the great mass movements of history surged through here, and now, not a sound. But there's a special feel to the place, an atmosphere. The past keeps crowding in, what historians call the oldest and most persistent theme in American history, immigration. They came here from the ends of the earth on an age-old quest. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you follow their footsteps through these halls and corridors, you can still sense their presence. You can sense it somehow in the very vacancy of the place. It leaps at you from the scattered and forgotten clues they left behind to mark their passage. A walk through Ellis Island is a journey into the American past. Today, all the emptiness and silence of Ellis Island seems concentrated here. But once it was jammed and packed and thronged from morning till night. As many as 5,000 immigrants passed through it every day. An official called it an enormous trough, continually filling up at one end and emptying out at the other. This is where the two sentences that changed the lives of millions were spoken. You may go on. Or, you are rejected, you must go back. They had to run a kind of gauntlet here, an obstacle race in which America itself was the prize. They were herded from one official desk to another, from one inspector to the next. All day long, the inspectors would call out the names of the immigrants in turn, and somebody said it sounded like roll call at the Tower of Babel. And if you listen, you can still catch the echoes of that roll call. You may hear the reverberation of a name you recognize. You may hear your own.
Otto Hensinger.
Anastasia Petrasa. Hyman Rico.
Mary Baranowski. Carolina Hyman. David Dubinsky. Knut Rockney. Igor Sikorsky.
Nobody knew then, of course, which of their names would afterwards become famous or notorious. Most of the names would never be heard of again. But each of them, even the mildest, the gentlest, the youngest, was living through a private, anonymous epic of his own, the venture of entering a strange world, another life. What would become of them in America? What would happen to them? 1,000 different things, good and bad. But one thing would happen to them all. America would happen to them. And they would happen to America. First, there was the obstacle course, the endless lines. Their papers held dumbly in their hands and fear in their faces. The most dreaded ordeal was the eye test, the examination for trachoma, which caused blindness and death. Trachoma meant certain rejection. When found in a child, it was a double tragedy. A parent would also have to turn back. It was only later that another immigrant, Hideo Noguchi, found the cause that led to the cure of trachoma. Medical examination was the most harrowing stage of the Ellis Island gauntlet. By loading themselves with baggage, some tried to disguise a deformity or hide a limp from the inspectors. Immigrants with dangerous symptoms, physical or mental, were chalked with an X. It was the X that often made Ellis Island the Isle of Tears. It might lead to final rejection. For those who hadn't been X'd out, the immigration inspection was next. One who survived it called it a conveyor belt where the future Americans were kept moving along like puppets, cringing under the scrutiny of inspectors who held the fate of human beings in their hands. The immediate fate that confronted them all was a barrage of official questions. Where were you born? Where did you reside last? Who paid your passage? To whom are you going? Is anyone meeting you? Is that person in the United States? How long has he been here? Show us an address. Is that person working? How much money have you? Who gave you the money? Can you read and write? Can you count? All right, good luck to you. So, it was at Ellis Island that the golden door first swung wide. And there were 40 languages and 100 ways to say, we made it. But no matter how many left the island, more kept pouring in. And Ellis, a city in itself, had to feed and bed and house them. Back in the Balkans, they had heard incredible tales of America where people ate white bread every day. And at Ellis, the marvels first came true. White bread and fresh milk and wonder of wonders, fresh fruit. You could be ticketed to any destination from the Ellis Railway office. It was an international transfer point from and Warsaw and Palermo to Buffalo and Pittsburgh and Chicago. America opened its gates to them as no nation had ever done. But they were not universally. Some thought America was becoming a dumping ground for Europe's rejects and outcasts. But it was an analyst of immigration who said, the strong-minded, the brave-hearted, the free and self-respecting come. The weak and timid stay home. In 1908, the poet Israel Zangwill coined a lasting phrase, the great melting pot where God is making the American. Germans and Frenchmen, Irishmen and Englishmen, Jews and Russians, into the crucible with you all. From this side of the registry hall, you can see that other island, Manhattan. It's only a mile away, but for the immigrant, that gap was the last barrier between dream and reality. A long voyage across the ocean would be futile until this little voyage was completed. New York meant America. They all came with a dream, and a boy from Syria named Salum Ritzik put his into words, the kind of words that expressed what so many immigrants believed. America, the land of hope, the land of liberty, the land of plenty, where God poured out his wealth and the dreams of men come true. Framtidslandet, the Swedes called it, the land of the future. To the Germans, it was das Land der unbegrenzten Möglichkeiten, the land of unlimited possibilities. Here at the tip of Manhattan, where millions first touched the mainland, the possibilities began. Possibilities, the bad with the good. Runners were waiting to pounce and steer them to overpriced rooming houses and work all sorts of swindles on the hapless and bewildered newcomers who were easy prey for dockside sharpers. The Lower East Side was the great catch basin of immigrants, bursting at the seams and bursting with vitality. Overwhelming, Salom Ritzik called it. An unbelievable jumble of people from everywhere. They soon discovered that even in the promised land, the streets weren't paved with gold. And one of them recorded the shock of it. I shall never forget how depressed I became as I trudged through those littered streets with the rows of pushcarts, the deafening noise, the ill-smelling merchandise. So this was America. Most of them had come from farms and rural districts, but here thousands swarmed into the cities, clustering together in tenements according to country, town, and even village of their origins. To many, English remained forever a foreign language, America a foreign country. In the melting pot, they remained unmelted. Sometimes in the dinginess of the tenements, the ache for a sunny birthplace far away was never soothed. There was always the emotional tug between past and present, and the young, too, were caught in it. A girl named Ansia Jezierska lamented, "I can't live with the old world, and I'm too green for the new. I'm one of the children of loneliness." But others said, "Yes, there is the strangeness and the weariness and sometimes the hunger. But above all, this is a country where God helps those who help themselves." So they worked, whole families together, for as little as 6.5 cents an hour, 17 hours a day. Anything to get a foothold, to hang on, and to hope for the future. There was always that hope, the promise of America. If I never see the dream come true, my children surely will. Here, where everything was possible, that was possible too. Tomorrow would be better for the children. Many an immigrant who never learned reading and writing in the old country was determined that if nothing else, his children would learn to read and write in the new. It was no small part of the dream. In the schools, America began to shape them into citizens. From the schools, they would go out and shape America. "This is the only country in the world," said Woodrow Wilson, "which experiences this constant and repeated rebirth. It is constantly being renewed from generation to generation by the same process by which it was originally created." Other influences worked on them. The tenements and slums where gangs were spawned and crime was bred. The catch basin was a harsh and brutalizing environment for many of the children of loneliness. But the paradox was that out of the slums and ghettos came so much that brightened and colored the American scene. From the sons of immigrants, newsboys and street urchins, came the future troubadours and clowns and minstrels of the nation, the Eddie Cantors and Jimmy Durantes, the Jolsons and the Gershons. Out of a dozen different national strains, they would weave some of the brightest strands in the American tapestry. One of them came all the way from Siberia by way of Ellis Island. As Irving Berlin, he grew up to write the song that could stand as the immigrant's tribute to his adopted land. God bless America. It took faith to emigrate, faith and courage. But here at Ellis Island, where the immigrant was suspended between two worlds, faith and courage sometimes faltered. So they came to this chapel to worship while they waited to hear what their fate would be. They came to pray for strength to face whatever might be in store for them. Like everything else at Ellis, the chapel was open to all, without distinction. Mohammedan and Jew, Catholic and Protestant. Those who had left home in search of religious freedom found it first here, on Ellis Island. Whatever God you worshipped, in whatever way, you were welcome here to ask his help in the uncertain time ahead. Over there on the wall of the chapel room, some unknown artist painted a mural that pictured what lay ahead for many of them. The painting gave them a foretaste of the immigrants' role in America, what had happened to others and what might happen with them. Some would venture deep inland to the far west, and out of immigrants would come pioneers. Thousands of them would settle the American land and work it and make it flourish. They brought brawn and muscle with them, that and the willingness to use them. Every working man, one of them wrote home, whether he has learned a trade or is only able to use the axe, the pick, or the spade, can make his daily bread in America. And that was how millions did make their bread, and they built America doing it. Many immigrants could echo the words of Mr. Dewey, a comic character of the day, when he said, "A shovel was thrust into me hand, and I was pushed into a street excavating as though I'd been born here. I was afraid I wasn't going to assimilate with the earlier Pilgrim Fathers, but I soon found that a long swing of the shovel made me as good as any other man." The accents vary. Magyar, Slovak, Croatian, Czech, Pole. But together they built the roads and manned the mills and poured the steel and mined the ore that made America the industrial giant of the world. There was a time when posters offering all sorts of inducements urged the foreigner to come. He was needed to populate an empty land, and the covered wagons were filled with immigrants trekking west. An eyewitness from Europe recorded his impressions. What abounds in America is what we lack most, space. The immigrant comes to you for bread, individual liberty, and social equality, and he finds the space to receive him. Compared to Europe, your country is as a sheet of white paper. Everything has to be begun. Railroads offered cheap land as an enticement to immigrant labor, and Stoyan Christou, the Macedonian, found his way from Ellis Island to a railway construction gang. "I linked one rail to another," he said, "and I knew I was linking myself to the new country and to a new life." They lived in dormitory cars as they moved across the country, pushing west from the east, mile by mile, and east from the west, mile by mile. They were Swedes and Germans and Poles and Irish, and Stoyan Christou marveled at the mixture. The boss, he said, was an Irishman with a fantastic name of Pat, just Pat. Could a man named Pat build a railway? He could, and so could men named Sven and Vasily and Giovanni and Hans and Joe. And there were great celebrations when they all met where the tracks met, to span the country from coast to coast. But there were some who had worked on the railroads who were not included in the celebrations, and the first anti-immigration laws in American history were passed against them, the Chinese. They were cheap labor and were feared as a yellow peril to the American standard of living. No Ellis Island ever welcomed them. The treacherous almond-eyed sons of Confucius, they were called, and they were beaten and boycotted and lynched in some of the worst outbreaks of racial prejudice America had ever seen. The Chinese weren't the only ones. You didn't have to have a different skin color or slanted eyes to be despised and abused. It helped, but it wasn't essential. As thousands who passed through Ellis Island found out, you could also be ridiculed and ostracized if you were born in the wrong part of Europe, or if you spoke with an accent, or if you went to the wrong church, or just for getting over here a little later than the man who was despising you. It became a pattern. As soon as one immigrant group was safely settled and Americanized, it often turned around and sniffed at later arrivals and told them to go back where they came from. By some perversity of human nature, a nation of immigrants never entirely freed itself of distrusting the immigrants. There was always the question of the hyphen, Irish-American, German-American, and so on. Which side of the hyphen weighed more? The side that came across the ocean or the American side? An answer came in 1917 when the United States declared war on Germany. There were more immigrants and descendants of immigrants of German stock than of any other. And now German meant enemy. It was the great test of all hyphenated Americans. They took to the streets to parade their loyalty with signs and banners. The U.S. is our fatherland. We know no other, the signs said. The American side of the hyphen overwhelmingly carried the day. The army that poured from the melting pot was almost 18% foreign-born. But by the great paradox of immigration, it was also 100% American. On the battlefield itself came the final vindication. Foreign-born and native-born alike gave the last full measure for America. But with peace abroad came trouble at home. Unemployment, strikes, and lockouts. Industrial paralysis across the land. A simmering resentment gripped the millions of jobless, many of them veterans, and violence threatened. With the Red Revolution sweeping Europe, the old distrust of the immigrant and alien seethed again in the United States. The national mood was ominous. Foreign was equated with radical. Arrests and reprisals reflected a spreading fear of the immigrant, who once again was regarded as a threat to the native working man and to the American way. Police raids were launched in 33 cities simultaneously by the U.S. Attorney General, and thousands of suspected Reds and assorted radicals were rounded up. Into the dragnet went many an innocent immigrant and alien as well. Fear of the foreigner became a national frenzy. There were mass deportations, and now the stream of aliens through the Golden Door was reversed. Undesirable alien became a national phrase. Ellis Island became an undesirable place. The deportations of the 1920s were a turning point in the immigration story. Fear of the alien agitator, concern that a renewed flood of immigrants would swamp the labor market, the growth of post-war isolationism. Together, they resulted in congressional curbs on all future immigration. Restrictions, limitations, quotas were in the making as the deportees were shipped out from Ellis Island. They left with little sympathy from the American people, and an animated cartoon of the day expressed the national attitude. The lady in the harbor never really lowered her torch, of course, but the sonnet on her base lost much of its meaning in the 1930s when fewer and fewer were welcomed by her lifted lamp. But what the statue stood for took on a deeper significance as the 30s ended and war came to Europe and to Asia. Liberty Enlightening the World was the statue's original title. But now in a darkening world, liberty was being menaced by the ultimate threat, extinction. At Pearl Harbor, Bataan, Corregidor, the menace erupted and showed its face, the brute face of aggression. Now on the west coast of the United States, another testing time came for an immigrant group, the Japanese Americans, and the test was a harrowing one. All Japanese persons, both alien and non-alien, will be evacuated by 12 o'clock noon, Tuesday, April 7th, 1942. A limited amount of clothing and equipment will be permitted. The order came from the Western Defense Command and there was no appeal. More than 100,000, most of them American citizens, were transported to confinement camps in the interior. They wore the face of the enemy, so fear and suspicion cast them out as potential traitors. They submitted with what they called shigataganai, realistic resignation. But like another immigrant group in another war, they too could say, the U.S. is our fatherland. We know no other. And given the chance, they would prove it spectacularly. Americanism, said Franklin Roosevelt, is a matter of mind and heart. Americanism is not and never has been a matter of race or ancestry. The 442nd Infantry Regiment, composed entirely of Japanese Americans, proved it spectacularly. At Anzio, in the Po Valley, on the Rapido River. What was feared as the face of the enemy turned out to be the face of American heroes. President Harry S. Truman himself paid honor to the 442nd for its astonishing record. 300% casualties, 3,500 wounds, 1,000 medals for bravery. This was the most decorated unit in American military history. Changed Ellis Island as it changed so many other places. Bars went up on the windows. Security risks, both Japanese and German, were held in detention halls, and the island became a kind of jail, among other things. Part of it became a Coast Guard training center and a merchant marine hospital. It ceased to be a reception center for immigrants Even after the war was over, the island went right on being a detention center. The bars and fences stayed up, as they did in so many other places around the world. But here at Ellis, the day came when the last prisoner, the last detained alien, was released. The jail became a ghost jail on a ghost island. But in the wake of the war, all around the world, there were jails, fences, and walls, and watchtowers that remained all too real, deadly real. Vacant fields through every available iron curtain, fleeing tyranny, seeking freedom at the risk of life itself. These were Hungarians in flight from the Russian tanks and execution squads which crushed the revolt of the freedom fighters in 1956. They were part of the post-war stream of refugees from 18 captive countries. But they were also figures in a larger, older human drama, the unending quest for life, liberty, and happiness. For thousands of them, as for thousands before them, the last best hope of Earth was America. And in processing centers like Vienna, there were scenes that recalled the heyday of Ellis Island. The old images were repeated as refugees became immigrants. DPs, they were called, displaced persons. But DP, somebody said, could also stand for delayed pilgrims. The old westward pilgrimage of those yearning to breathe free began again. When they saw the statue, one of them said, "We thanked God we were here. It was so hard to believe after so much had happened. Oh, it was something." There are no words to tell you how happy we are to be here. They went off to discover their own America and become part of it. They were already part of the continuing but changing story of immigration. At Ellis, the last chapter was already written, and the eerie emptiness of the island signified the ending of an era. Once there were 20,000 books here, books in all languages for readers of all nationalities. But not 20,000 volumes together could ever tell the full epic of Ellis Island. The story, after all, goes back to the beginnings. 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. 18 of them were of foreign stock, and 8 of those were born outside the colonies. George Washington himself welcomed what he called the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions. His officers had names like Kosciuszko and Lafayette and Steuben and Pulaski, and so did many of his men at Valley Forge. Since Washington's time, about 29 million immigrants have come here to stay. But the quota system of the 1920s, the national origins theory, canceled the general invitation to the people of the world. The quota idea was that people could be pigeonholed into types and races. Geography fixed your status as a human being. If you came from Northwest Europe and were white, Anglo-Saxon, and preferably Protestant, you were in. But if you happened to be born in Eastern or Southern Europe, you were out or way down on the quota list. It was not the idea on which it was built. Back then, the Golden Door was open to everyone from everywhere, and they came through it with gifts to share. Their names still sound like a roll call in the old registry hall downstairs. Toscanini, Gropius, Stravinsky, Van Loan, Iturbi, Hurok. And the secret of the atom itself was unlocked and given first to America by immigrants and refugees such as Einstein from Germany, Fermi from Italy, Teller from Hungary, and the Scandinavian Niels Bohr, men from all over the map of Europe. But the national origins law stayed on the books for 40 years, stayed until Congress, led by the sons and grandsons of immigrants, corrected what President Johnson called a cruel and enduring wrong. He wanted to sign that bill here on Ellis Island, but the island was said to be in a pretty sorry state of upkeep. So the ceremony that celebrated the first liberalization of the immigration law in almost half a century was held in another appropriate place, over there on Liberty Island. Lyndon Johnson spoke from the base of the statue October 3rd, 1965. His speech proclaiming the new immigration law was heard by such distinguished immigrants as General David Sarnoff, Edward Steichen, Spiros Skouras, Admiral Hyman Rickover.
This bill says simply that from this day forth, those wishing to immigrate to America shall be admitted on the basis of their skills and their close relationships to those already here. This is a simple test, and it is a fair test. Those who can contribute most to this country, to its growth, to its strength, to its spirit, will be the first that are admitted to this land. Our beautiful America was built by a nation of strangers. The land flourished because it was fed from so many sources, because it was nourished by so many cultures and traditions and peoples. The days of unlimited immigration are past. But those who do come will come because of what they are and not because of the land from which they sprung. Over my shoulders here you can see Ellis Island, whose vacant corridors echo today the joyous sound of long ago voices. And today we can all believe that the lamp of this grand old lady is brighter today, and the golden door that she guards gleams more brilliantly in the light of an increased liberty for the people from all countries of the globe.
They still come. Majestic ships slipping through the morning haze of the harbor still bring them in. But what was once a flood is now a trickle, and the days of steerage in coffin ships is long past. Now they often come tourist class in luxury liners, and passage through the Golden Door is smooth and serene. Sometimes the new arrivals ask, what's that place over there? The ships steam indifferently past. There's no longer any reason to stop for Ellis Island. The wreckers will be moving in before long now. Ellis Island will come full circle. Once back in Peter Stuyvesant's time, this was picnic grounds. Now the island will become part of the national park system. Perhaps the old ferry over there will be preserved as a reminder of the 12 million immigrants it carried from this island to a new life in a new world. Ellis Island will virtually cease to be an island at all. A causeway will connect it with the nearby Jersey shore, and there will be gardens and promenades and play areas, and once again, picnic grounds. The main building here will remain, so the island will never entirely lose its character as the world's greatest immigration. A Norwegian seaman named Arne Pedersen achieved a kind of immortality by being the last alien off the island, the last of the millions who passed through it. Arne Pedersen had overstayed his leave and was shipped back to Norway, a melancholy comment on the decline and fall of Ellis Island. But the old Ellis Island will survive in history books and in the national memory, along with Bunker Hill, the Liberty Bell, and Independence Hall. In all the world, there has never been a place quite like it. There will never be again. Only America has had such an island as the one called Ellis.
Project 20 extends special thanks to these individuals, agencies, and organizations who cooperated in the making of this program.